quiera. Sabe mis sentimientos, siente mi amor. No me dejes sufrir, mamá, quita mi dolor. Eso, coge lo que quieras, toma con razón. Lo que quieres te...
Freedom and justice. That is it. And the prison for and you know it is because of the prison that we don't hear much about it. Because of the prisons, it was more a state system. Visitors were not allowed. Toys and all of them were keeping to it.
Yeah, we are looking at pictures from the sleep.
Grueling pictures, I have to say. Okay. Look at that poor man with
Yes.
his eyes full of sadness. And where was this? Australia? Or here?
This is Barbados. Barbados became the main disembarkment by the British, used by the British to disembark their slaves and later distributed to other places. In the 1800s, they go a boat would load almost about 5 years. Yes. There was much talk about that. Dreadlocks recently.
Yes.
Yeah, in the news. But it wasn't a tradition. But before a slave is shipped from here, maybe you spend 3 months in the dungeons, you spend 3 months in the ocean.
Is the volume high enough there?
Yeah. So this is for William. They mined the gold for 130 years.
130 years.
From 1482 up to 1612.
Okay.
And that is why they named the coast Gold Coast. And then they named the village El Nino,
Mining town.
which simply means the mines. But you know, there were no mines. The gold was just part of it.
It was just there.
It was just part of the something. For William was purposely built for the slave.
Oh, really? Okay.
He used to buy slave for 112 years. He shipped almost about 280,000 slaves.
280,000.
But you know, I would say Anamabu remained the largest slave supply center on the Gold Coast. Because there were other 40 years. First the Dutch built the pay, the Swiss. Then finally, even the English had to struggle with the French before how. Yeah, and even there was the first English fort for Charles. Yeah, that was in the 1640s. And so, Anamabu, before this one was added to the normal data that's taken, Anamabu supplied almost about 464,000 as against 381 at Cape Coast and 255 at the just because Anamabu was nearer to Asimos,
Okay.
where the slaves will have their last.
That's how far is the bath from here? Or what's
I would say about 25 to 30 kilometers from here.
it's still quite far.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Anamabu remained the biggest of all the forts. The English refer to the fort as the Buckingham Palace of the coast. Because it cost 18,493 English pounds. Yes, so it was a very expensive fort for the English. So it was used extensively.
Te necesito, mi amor, te necesito. Ay, yo te necesito, la verdad. Ay, necesito tu amor. Ay, necesito tu amor. Necesito tu amor.
Another feature of Fort William is that Fort William remains only the fort that at the auction room with a platform where the slaves were auctioned. So we are now entering the auction.
So they actually auction now. They actually it's a system where it's well designed to auction them here.
Of course, because
Okay.
though in the beginning there was no money,
Mm-hmm.
and so there was the barter system of trade.
Okay.
But when money came into the system, that was from 1700s.
Mm-hmm.
So they started to. Yeah.
So this is more like a trade.
Of course. But slaves came as far as from the north. I heard you were saying that you were there and someone coming in. Of course, there were the raiders. Yeah. But what made slavery very lucrative also was the tribal wars in those days. You know, the many tribes, even on the Gold Coast, there were Ashanti, Fanti, aside from Nigeria and all those, Kibi and all those. After the wars, all those people became prisoners of war. And for the raiders, slaves were captured as far as Chad, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. They walk on foot from the desert.
All the way down to the coast.
All the way down.
Is there any reason why the couldn't go further up the north?
Yeah, because the Ottoman Empire was ruling the north, ruling the canal.
Okay.
That is why the Europeans started finding a new sea route to India, because the Ottoman Empire were in control of the Suez Canal from the 18th century.
Pretty much.
So so they couldn't actually use that route. Yeah, so they had to walk on the foot.
So avoid.
Yeah. And to imagine walking for almost about 6 to 7 months.
Yeah. So much of them perish.
Of course, some of them will die. You ever watch the film Apocalypse? We call it Apocalypse. By Mel Gibson. It's a Brazilian. It was taken in America. You see bigger empires, raging smaller empires, taking them. Though some of the slaves were also forcibly captured by the Europeans themselves. Yeah. So when they are brought to the yard, they were brought to the auction where they were auctioned on the platform. Original platform. Auction.
So the slaves stood up
Yeah,
there.
so the slaves stood up there after their physical fitness had been taken into consideration. Because they needed those who are very strong without no ailment.
So
Men.
if you had any ill ailment, then what's going to happen to you?
And then maybe you integrate with the local residents,
Okay.
because maybe you couldn't go back
Okay.
to where you were taken. So during that time, most of the villages on the coast became cosmopolitan villages with the influx of other people who couldn't go back to their places. Yeah. So the men were auctioned for 5 English pounds. The women were auctioned for 3 English pounds. While the children remained for the barter system. And the children mostly referred to as stubborn children.
Was there any specific reason why they were referred to as stubborn children?
And that was the idea. I mean, lead out to the blacks that at least when your son proved to be stubborn, because I for one, My grandmother would tell me, I was born and bred at Elmina, which has the biggest castle. My grandmother would tell me, come now, if it had been the old days, I would have taken you to the whites.
She didn't do it.
She meant it. She meant it because this is something that
So if you're being stubborn, that's what they would say.
they be stubborn.
Listen to your parents. Listen to your parents. Careful. Okay.
Yeah. So the children ranging from 10 to 14 years, men and women ranging from 15 to 25 years. So after this, the auction, then they
Por eso mira, escucha de nuevo. Por tu amor me muero, ahí te voy a